Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our online discussion on the topic, the first 100 days of the new government in Montenegro, expectations fulfilled. And we have currently around 40 people dialed in, so thank you very much for the interest. A very warm welcome to our two speakers today. We have Zlatko Vujovic from Montenegro. He is the president of the governing board of the Center for Monitoring and Research, or short CEMI. And we have Dusan Drelic. He is the head of the Brussels office of the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, also known as SWP or SWP. Thank you two so much for joining us today. I would also like to thank our Aspen team and especially Tina Boyes for putting this whole event together. And I would also like to thank the Open Society Foundations and the German Federal Press Agency for their support of our project and of this particular event. Before we get started with the discussion, just a very few technical remarks. We are recording this discussion and we will make it available later on our YouTube channel. And the link will also be sent to you in case you want to rewatch it or share it with interested colleagues. In terms of the procedure, the first half an hour will be a moderated discussion with Mr. Ilic and Zlatko and me. And in the second half of the discussion, you or the audience will be able to ask their questions. You have two ways or two options to ask a question. You can either raise your hand and ask the question directly to whom you want to address it, or alternatively, you can use the Q&A section and pose a written question. In that case, I would kindly ask you to keep it as short and precise as possible. And to specify to whom this question goes, if applicable. And now, without further ado, we will jump right into the discussion on the new government of the smallest, but certainly not less interesting country of the Western Balkans. Maybe just a few remarks on the general context. I'm sure most of our viewers are aware of it, but to set the background. Montenegro officially opened accession negotiations with the EU in 2012. It has opened all chapters, and it has or is often been described as the front runner in the region in the EU accession process. And in 2017, Montenegro also became a member of NATO. In August last year, the parliamentary elections resulted in a major political change. Namely, after several decades in power, the ruling party DPS lost its parliamentary majority and will, or what was for the first time not part of the government. But we have a new coalition with a rather slim majority, and I would say with different political ideologies. And therefore, a little surprisingly, it took until December 2020 to form the government, which is oftentimes called a technical or expert government, but I think we will come to this also later. And now a little more than 100 days into office, we would like to make an interim assessment of the performance so far. And I am more than happy to have two experts here with us to analyze the situation and the performance of the new government. So we will jump right into the questions. Zlatko, I would go with you first. The new government has listed several priority areas for reforms, including strengthening good governance, the rule of law, transparency, but also fighting corruption and organized crime. So in your assessment, what is the current track record of the new government in this regard? And have they fulfilled, or are they at least starting to fulfill voters' expectations? You're still muted, Zlatko?
Thank you, Victoria, and I would like to greet all the participants. This is a really rare opportunity, but it is really good moment. So thank you to Aspen Institute for organizing this debate. So regarding your question, it is very hard to evaluate government that does not have still its program neither adopted budget. So it's very strange for Montenegrin practice that the government started its work without any program. So no real promises. Prime Minister was not really precise during his inaugural speech. Deputy Prime Minister Bazovic, who is a coordinator of security services, tweets very often about results of the government in the field of fight against corruption and organized crime. But if anyone really goes deep in that, it is easy to see that those are mostly results of the Special Prosecutor Office, the same office that ruling majority proposed to shut down. As most of you are informed about, ruling majority proposed a prosecution laws that would annul all constitutional and law changes that decrease the level of control of executive branch over the Supreme State Prosecutor. Those changes previously were imposed by EU and Venice Commission. Although the EU has initially turned its blind eye when the amendments to the law on civil servants and state employees have been adopted in December, a similar scenario was not allowed in the process of adoption of the two prosecution laws. So we can say that actually EU was very strict about that they are not supporting adoption of those laws. After less than 3 months of the government, Prime Minister Krivokapic warned the parliamentary majority that adoption of the amendments of the law of state prosecution, a new law on prosecution for organized crime and corruption, would mean that the country has crossed the red line in the accession negotiation. So that would mean it would stop negotiation. After opinion of Venice Commission, which was negative, we received a few days ago, we do not know what the ruling majority would do. So we still are on the edge of the blockade of the EU negotiation talks. It is hard really to identify any achievements of the new government, especially if we take into account that all appointments in the state-owned companies, other positions with the state institution are done only based on the party affiliation and not on the merit-based approach. And this is something completely opposite to what they promised during the campaign and especially after they took over the control. So we can say that new ruling majority is doing the same for what we criticized previously DPS. So we can conclude that the current ruling majority has a promise a change, but they just replace DPS in doing the same when we are talking about nepotism, corruption, chronism, etc. So I think that it is almost impossible to find something that was really good achievement, but it was also followed by the political instability, because as the Speaker of the Parliament often says, Mr. Bečić, that this government is not supported by 96% of the MPs in the Parliament. So it is very strange. They received votes of 41 MPs. Our Parliament has 81 seats, but factically the government was much more criticized by the representatives MPs from the ruling majority than actually by opposition, which is very strange and not really something that is usual in parliamentary system. So it is hard to understand really who this government is representing, who is supporting this government, because actually only one political party, URA, Crno na bijelo, black and white coalition, is actually fully supporting this government, and only its leader is part of its government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zlatko. Dusan, based on what Zlatko has said, and he has also mentioned the EU pressure in relation to the law on prosecutors. What is, in your view, the EU's perspective on the state of rule of law in Montenegro, and also its outlook under the new government? And what about the front-runner status of the country?
Well, you used the expression against front runner. My impression is that in the whole of the region, there has been very little running in the last couple of years. And especially since the pandemic broke out, the enlargement process has largely, to put it politely, stalled. But my personal opinion is also that the EU enlargement in Southeast Europe has actually collapsed. And to expect now big changes in times of the pandemic and in times of a very deep uncertainty in the European Union about its own future would be really a strange thing. Also, going back to what you asked, Latko, I think it would be preposterous to expect the new government in Montenegro to dismantle in 100 days what the previous autocratic rule has established in 30 years. And the deep state established by President Đukanović exists in the judiciary, in the police, in parts of the media, all over the place. And Mr. Đukanović himself is present and alive and kicking hard around. So I think that the struggle for power in Montenegro is going on. And we have no guarantees at all that the point of no return has been reached in the sense of having a perspective of fast changes. The question is, of course, what's better for the environment, for the vicinity? What's better for the EU? Is it better to continue with 30 years of autocratic rule, which has given a bad name to the EU's relations with the rulers in the region? Because for many people, it looked as if it doesn't matter who rules as long as he has the right speaking points prepared when the delegations come. Or do we want to see change, which might be chaotic and which might produce unwanted results? But in any case, there is a possibility to break up with the structures who are in their essence, not only in Montenegro, but throughout most of the region, deeply anti-democratic, deeply anti-EU, and in a way serve only the interests of a very, very thin elite in the region.
Thank you so much, Dusan, for this comment. I would now like to also make up a second topic, and Dusan, you just mentioned the pro-EU stance or the non-pro-EU stance, which is why I would like to speak more about the geopolitical context and foreign policy now. In November 2020, the Aspen Institute Germany organized a similar discussion round on what to expect from Montenegro's incoming government. So back then we didn't have the government sworn in yet. And during this discussion, some experts voiced concerns about the foreign policy or the future foreign policy orientation of the new government and potential external influences, especially from Russia. So Zlatko, what is your assessment of the foreign policy strategy or orientation of the new government? Especially also given the fact that we have seen some, let's say, controversial appointments also in the security sector.
No, it's very important to underline that the previous election were not just, let's say, fight to the two forces, one that is supporting the corruption and one that is actually against the corruption. Some of the tycoons are in the current government. You know, we can see the leader of the Democratic Front in Budva. He was the ex-DPS tycoon, but he's now changed the side. You know, so there are a few examples of that. And also this coalition is supported by the President Vučić strongly and by its media in the Serbia. So it is very important to underline that it's not black and white situation. So this government is dominantly composed by the activists and loyalists of the Serbian Orthodox Church. Prime Minister was a pick of that church for list puller of Democratic Front on the last election. Also, he was a pick of the church for the position of the Prime Minister. And that was confirmed by the leaders of Democratic Front. So this is not a speculation. This is something that was said by the leaders of the new ruling majority. And in return, Serbian Orthodox Church supported at least and heavily took part in electoral campaign. This was something that never happened in Montenegro, and this is not usually the church not supporting, but taking campaign activities during the campaign. That was something as a surprise, but it was, on the other hand, except the Deputy Prime Minister, Dabazovic, there are no minority representatives in the government, and only few of them are appointed on lower position in this ruling by this ruling majority. As Serbian Orthodox Church is under the strong influence of the Serbian authorities, especially President Vučić, as well as the Russian Orthodox Church, it was expected that the government would not be fully pro-Western. There is a declaration signed by the list pullers of the three coalitions that actually confirmed that their orientation will be pro-Western, which was really good, accepted by the international representatives, especially those who are from NATO countries, and it was a relief for them. But you know, some things that happen during the appointments of high officials, like, for example, the director of the Agency for National Security, another key position in the security sector, are confirmed that concerns were actually real. Latest scandal of leaking information about Montenegrin, as well as about the agents from Partner Security Agency, one NATO member country, proven that those concerns were real. Acting director of Montenegrin Agency for National Security, instead of being fired, because he was actually responsible for that leak, because he shared documents to the members of the Parliamentary Board for Security Defense about identity of the agents from the other security service. He was actually supported by the Prime Minister. He's received full support for all he's doing, and the responsibility was actually sent on the side of the MPs, that they are responsible for that. So Serbian involvement in electoral process, precisely party of the President Vučić, was repeated more openly on local elections in Nikšić. So the high level officials from the party of President Vučić were in the field in Nikšić. They were helping organizing the Democratic Front list. All the media controlled by the President Vučić from Serbia, they were heavily supporting Democratic Front list in Montenegro. Regarding other, what is the concern for the further political development in Montenegro is that actually in Montenegro is happening something similar to the Serbia, and that actually the President Vučić, let's say people linked to President Vučić, are buying the media also in Montenegro. Some of those media were already bought with different very controversial arrangement, like, for example, First TV, Prva TV from Serbia, that is also broadcasted in Montenegro. They have the national frequency here. So it's we have some information that happened also to one more television national frequency, and the second one is in the process of to be sold to some subject companies from Serbia as a same model. So actually it is a very strong involvement of the Serbia, previously Russia, and I see it's really like Serbia is acting like the proxy of Russia. Keeping the interest. What would be the big challenge for this government in order to prove the promises that were given to especially our NATO partners, is the alignment with the harmonization with the foreign policy of the EU. Now it is 100% harmonized. But you know, with these constant new sanctions against Russia, it is going to be very hard to continue with this, especially because it now talks about the reconstruction, reforming the government structure already started, and it is expected that the Democratic Front representatives will be part of the new government officially. Now they are present on the lower level, but they do not have formally the ministers. And it is hard to expect that nothing will change if Democratic Front will be part officially by the government, because every decision of the government should be voted by its members. So I would say that actually now we are still formally, officially having the pro-Western policy, but in the coalition where at least 65% are not, of their members are not pro-Western, it is hard to expect that we'll have the real pro-Western policy. It is more expected that we will continue, we will start harmonization with the approach of the Serbia, which is not that European integration is the European Union is the priority. They have 4 pillars of the international policy.
Thank you so much, Zlatko. And Dusan, for you, Zlatko just mentioned that at least officially the government is still pro-Western, but at least from on the inside, Zlatko said at least 65%, I think you said, are actually non-Western parties or parties with a more pro-Russian stance. And he also mentioned this scandal in the security sector. So in your view, and given that Montenegro is a NATO member since 2017, what does this mean for NATO? And also, in general, what is your assessment of the external influences in Montenegro and the regional implications here?
While Zlatko was talking about the role of the religious communities in the change of the regime, I had to think of Pope Wojtyla and his role in the downfall of communism. You know, sometimes religious organizations play a huge political role. They are never left out of the political game. Sometimes they are open, sometimes they are less open. In any case, I think that we have developed a tendency in the last couple of years to see Vladimir Putin behind every bush and to accuse so-called malign influences for all the evils and for all the shortcomings which are happening in the transition region, and especially in Southeast Europe, which is an agglomeration of unconsolidated democracies. I think that it's quite useful to look at the geographical map. And we see that on Yugoslav soil and in Albania, we have now 4 new members of NATO. And we see that Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Kosovo are actually surrounded by EU and NATO states. And there is a chain of NATO states from the Baltics to the Black Sea. So that I really don't see a physical opportunity for Russia to project military influence in the Eastern Adriatics. This does not preclude propaganda coups. And wherever I think the European Union does not live to its promises, this opens the space for autocratic regimes like Putin's, like Erdogan's, like the Chinese, and even like autocratic regimes in the European Union, like Mr. Orban's regime and so on, to expand its influence. To give you a very concrete example, President Rama of Albania just returned, I think yesterday, from Turkey, where he made an arrangement to buy Chinese vaccines. And Albania is also buying Russian vaccines now. The failure of the European Union to live up to its promise that it will take care not only about itself in the terms of fighting the pandemic and having a speedily vaccination of the people, is opening the space for people like Mr. Vučić to score propagandistic effect, to strengthen his own rule by saying, look, the Europeans have been promised things to you, and what have they delivered to you? There is a Reuters article yesterday saying that people from the neighborhood, from Bosnia, from Macedonia, and so on, are coming now to Serbia to get vaccinated. I have an Italian relative. He traveled from Milan to Belgrade and got his shot. So there is, on the level of our construction of how ideally the relationship would function between the candidate countries and the potential candidate countries, and what's happening on the ground, there is a discrepancy. And this discrepancy is not on this anecdotal level with vaccines and with little propagandistic effects. It goes deeper. EU approximation should be about achieving in a middle time, the same standard of living with the EU. It's about convergence. It's not only about having the same legal framework, of course it's important, but it's about how people live and having a perspective that if you stick to the path of EU enlargement, you and your children will, in some foreseeable future, achieve a better quality of life. What we see in Southeast Europe, in the Southeast European Six, is that there is no convergence with the EU standards of living, with the EU standards of what expectations you might have. Just the other way around, there is more and more development to the other side, divergence. If the European Union does not put its money where the mouth is and show very concrete solidarity with the region in terms of development aid, we shall see that within a very short period of time, the credibility of the European Union will disintegrate. And I'll give you just one figure to think about. Croatia, with less than 4 million inhabitants, will receive through the European budget next 7 years and through the recovery fund, 20 billion euro free for development. Hungary will receive 60 billion euro and Bulgaria 29 billion euro. This is free capital, which already helped a lot in previous times, the development of infrastructure and so on and so on. This is not the way in which the European Union is treating the candidate countries. They receive a little bit of support, mostly for institutional changes. IPA 3 money, we've been hearing that it will be up to 9 billion euro in the next 7 years, but we have to see whether this will be really development money or institutional reform money. My point is, without treating in financial terms and in terms of solidarity, the countries of enlargement in the enlargement area in the same way as the Western countries of the European Union are treating the new EU member countries, the thing will be coming to an end very soon. And just one more figure. The German taxpayer would have to spend €1 per month to achieve the same amount of aid, development aid to the Balkans as now we have with Central and Eastern Europe.
Thank you so much, Dusan, and also thank you for raising the point of EU credibility in the region. I think, Zlatko, it is also, I mean, on the one hand, it's a two-way street. It's the EU needs to be credible on its commitments and its support, but of course we also need support within the countries and within the populations for EU accession and also for the related reforms. And in your last paper, which I think my colleague which my colleague Tina just posted in the chat, you also raised concerns about the government's plans to change the citizenship law. And there's also a census coming up this year in Montenegro, which is a politically sensitive issue. So Zlatko, could you give us a little more background on this, on the potential implications and your take on it?
Yes, before that, I would just make one remark. You know, I'm not sure that making a parallel between Pope Wojtyla and the Serbian Orthodox Church role in the last election process is fully appropriate. I would really say that Serbian Orthodox Church, especially Metropolitan Amfilohije, played a very negative role during the wars in ex-Yugoslavia. That official standing points of the church were supporting the activities of the militaries and the Serbian Yugoslav army in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Croatia. They were also Metropolitan Amfilohije, who was leading those protests here in Montenegro, officially is denying, together with the other bishops of the Serbian Orthodox Church, for example, genocide in Srebrenica. For example, he's standing in this position on the Metropolitan Amfilohije about, for example, NATO Pact was that NATO is the fourth German Reich. Fourth Nazi Reich. So actually, this is something that was publicly said. So it is hard to believe that actually, the Poland was a communist country at that time. Montenegro was not a communist country. We had some authoritarian tendencies in our society. But let's compare, for example, Serbia after the latest election and Montenegro. In the case of Serbia, we have only few MPs that are opposition, because the opposition was boycotting, and they are only representing the Albanians for Preševo, Bujanovac, and Medveđa. In the case of Montenegro, Đukanović lost the election, and he accepted the result of the election and lost only a few hours after our organization given the projection result, because we are doing parallel vote tabulation, and we announced the first projection of the result only 1 hour after polling stations were closed. Đukanović accepted 2 hours after we announced it, before the official result. And the transition went, even for us, unexpectedly so smoothly. So this is some, let's say, result of democratic processes here that no one really thinks that could stop the democratic, what the people decided. Regarding this citizenship law, etc., it is very important to note what President Vučić said on the press conference on the 6th January 2020. That was when all these protests started in Montenegro. And he said there are 3 priorities of the Serbia regarding the Montenegro. One was to fully support Serbian Orthodox Church in their fight in Montenegro against the government, and that we see how strong support was actually from all means. The second one is to support Serbian organization. And he promised that from the budget of Serbia, they will allocate 10 times more funding for the organization, Serbian organization in Montenegro, to run and to fight in order not to decrease participation of the Serb population on the following census. So we could translate that to increase number of the declared Serbs on the census. And the third priority, he said actually that the Serbs in Montenegro should have the same position, constitutional position, like Serbs have in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Albanians have in Macedonia, in North Macedonia. So that would mean that some constitutional recomposition of Montenegro, which is not possible because we have really strict provision in our constitution. But I think that we are now facing with the attempt to change the composition within constitutional frame. Why I'm saying that? And this is linked to your question about the controversial citizenship law. Actually, our Prime Minister announced that they will change the law on the citizenship, and that will give the citizenship to many people who live in Montenegro or live from time to time in Montenegro, and they are already citizens of the Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. We didn't have opportunity to see that draft. It is not maybe yet prepared, but that is what we are concluding from the statements of the Prime Minister. Because he said that actually those are for those who actually started living in Montenegro from neighboring country, and he was mentioning also the Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. What that would mean for Montenegro? That would mean not only to let's say, to change the balance between, let's say, Serbian and Montenegrin identity, but it is much more important that it will change the electorate in the way that we will lose pro-Western majority for the long time, because dominantly it is expected that those are the voters who will support Democratic Front, and they are not pro-Western oriented. And this is a challenge from pro-Western orientation of Montenegro. What was also some of we were seeing a lot of incidents after the E-Day on the ethnic base. Incidents, still the tensions are very high, because for example, there was a proposal of the one human rights activist to organize something like a memory day on victims of the COVID in Montenegro. That was supported by the president of Montenegro. But Prime Minister didn't accept that. But what he did on that day, he planted olive tree, but on the ground of the Orthodox monastery, not on the silver. So that was the really wrong message by the Prime Minister, you know, like mourning only those who are Orthodox. So there are a lot of the very bad messages sent by the government and ruling majority. For example, the president of the parliamentary board for human rights and minority rights is the person who is officially saying in the parliament, he's not recognizing genocide in Srebrenica. And he's not just MP, he's the chairman of the board for human rights and minority rights. So I think that we are facing the government policies are not really trying to make some kind of the links with the minorities. And there's a lot of the tensions. And for example, about when we are talking about human rights, they don't recognize the Montenegrin Orthodox Church. They don't recognize the rights of those who are believers and supporters of the Montenegrin Orthodox Church. For example, they don't even let their representative to take part in the public debates about the laws. The Ministry for the Human Rights and the Justice doesn't want to speak with the representative of the church. So sorry, but this is really something that is saying that we are going in the wrong way. Yes, the corruption is very important, but you know, if the corruption should be solved in the way like Vučić, you know, who is still talking about what yellows did, you know, and completely ignoring what his power and his rule did, this is not a good way. We need really support of the EU. We really need to follow recommendation of the Venice Commission and the EU and US stakeholders, because I believe it is because our changes and reform are not done in the proper way. And we need to go forward, not backward.
Thank you, Zlatko. And before I hand over to Dusan for his intervention, I just wanted to announce that after that, we will then open the floor for questions. And I see already a few hands up, but just so the audience is also prepared. Dusan, please, your comment or your response to this.
Yes, Zlatko, what the association which I had about Pope Wojtyla was because of communism. My point is that religious organizations play often a decisive role in political change. And the association with communism was because Mr. Đukanović impersonates the continuity from communist times. No one else had started in the region as an official of the party to become now the leader of the pro-European, or at least declaring himself to be a leader of a pro-European policy option. So this was my association. As to the relationship with the autocratic ruler of Serbia, Mr. Vučić, my impression is that one of the people who was really disappointed with the development in Montenegro was Mr. Vučić himself, because he enjoyed such a cozy, friendly relationship with Mr. Đukanović all the time, that for him, just the idea that at some point, a lot of information which are buried in the deep state might come to the surface is quite a scary perspective. And I guess that this is one of the reasons why the Serbian Progressive Party and the government of Vučić has increased its presence on the ground in Montenegro. Let's not forget that according to KRIK, which is an investigative website, in the last 10 years, there were 175 killings in the milieu of the Montenegrin and Serbian criminal gangs, operating mostly freely in Montenegro and Serbia. 175 people in 10 years. And out of these killings, up to now, only 18 have been put on trial and pronounced guilty. So if we see such a saturation with organized crime in the region, it's a strong indicator that this cannot happen without the involvement of the state, of state institutions. And my feeling was that for all autocratic rulers, the idea that in elections you can change the government that you can start political changes, no matter how promising they are and where they will lead, that this is scaring autocrats. Look how much resistance was against Mr. Zaev in what's now North Macedonia. There was a huge campaign, even in Brussels, pointing out that with Mr. Zaev, things will go in a very unstable direction and so on and so on. For everyone who is supporting this strengthening of democratic structures and a democratic political culture, the point of breaking with autocratic rule, be it in Serbia, be it in Montenegro, be it with Gruevski in Macedonia, is an essential issue. And Zlatko's criticism of very clumsy moves of the new government in Montenegro is completely justified. However, what if we put it on the scales? Is it better to keep the ancien regime with all the criminal background as it has? Or is it better to expect that society and the parliament and the society itself will produce a new quality? I am always for change. I don't think that people who have a continuity from the communist times can produce a better future for the region.
Thank you, Dusan. And you will also have, Zlatko, and you will also have the chance to comment if you want. But I would now bring in some questions from our audience. The first question would be from Adnan Cerimagic. Can we please unmute him?
Yes. Hello, Victoria, Dusan, Zlatko. Thank you very much for organizing this event. Adnan Cerimagic from European Stability Initiative. I have first of all, thank you very much for organizing this event, because I think that both Dusan and Zlatko represent how I feel about the current debate in Montenegro, and that is that there are two opposite sides, and that both sides seem to have some good arguments in their corner. My question for Dusan, sorry, would be, Dusan, do you think that with, as you said just now, that some of these comments and criticism are to the point? Do you see in the current government interest to respond to this criticism and do something? In particular, I mean, if we speak about this criticism about the minorities, if we speak about the criticism about relations with NATO, about some things that were happening that are bad, do you see the potential there, or do you see that they are doing what I have a sense somehow in general debate in Montenegro, is that they're just responding by saying, oh, we're better than the previous government, so let us do all these small mistakes or big mistakes, we are simply better than them? Do you see that potential then? Because if they have that, then I would say that there might be something behind that is different than so far. And for Zlatko, I have a question regarding COVID-19. By far, Montenegro's figures are the worst in the region when it comes to the number of deaths, when it comes to the number of the cases. We see how much it struggles with the vaccines, but somehow in international media, we are not focusing that much. So I was wondering, how big of the topic is that in Montenegro, reaction to the pandemic, and attempt to both deal with the health crisis, but at the same time with the economic crisis, because we know that tourism is a big source. And how do you see this government moving forward with the reaction to the COVID? Thank you, Victoria, and to the panel.
Thank you, Adi, for the question. I would put in one more written question. I think we just lost Zlatko. Well, maybe then in the meantime, Dusan, you already start answering your question, and we will see if we can get.
But Victoria, you said that there was a written question as well.
Yes, but it's to Zlatko actually. It's okay. What's the?
There he is again.
Good. Perfect. But I just asked Dusan to already answer the question posed to him, and then you go next, Zlatko.
I don't know how to answer Adnan's questions because I can't look into the future. I think that as this government is composed of people who have not been in power before, most of them, they will be making mistakes. It can't be different. Whether they will learn from their mistakes is also a question which depends only partly on them, but it depends on the environment in which they operate, on the pressure which the deep state and the previous regime will put on them, and on the pressure which will come on them from Vučić, from the Albanian parties in Kosovo and in Albania itself, and also how the European Union will play out on the ground. There is always contingency in political developments, and it would be naive to expect that only because you have good intentions you will produce good results. I'll repeat what I said before. My preference is not to go back to the previous regime. My preference would be to dismantle the deep state there, because it could be a signal to Serbia, to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and in farther places that it's possible to have political improvement through elections. If the government fails in Montenegro, this will be a bad signal. It will be a bad signal to the country itself. It will be a bad signal to the region.
Thank you, Dusan. And Zlatko, for you, I think you heard the question by Adi on COVID-19. And I would like to add another question from our written chat by Hans-Jörg Brey from the Southeast Europe Association on the current state of the controversial law on freedom of religions and legal position of the religious community. So maybe you could also comment on that a little, and then we do a second round of questions.
I didn't hear the question about the COVID. Can you help me with that question?
He was referring to the current numbers in Montenegro and how the situation is unfolding and what the government is doing. But with the Montenegro being one of the, I would say, worst hit countries currently.
Actually, Adnan, sorry that I cannot say anything.
It seems like that Zlatko has a very bad connection currently. I'm not sure whether, Dusan, you want to pick up any of these questions, because they're probably not.
Thousand people.
Sorry, Zlatko?
Hello?
Maybe, Zlatko, you have a very bad internet connection. Maybe you can switch off the video for now while you answer the question, because we could not hear any part of your answer, unfortunately.
Okay, cool. So actually, when we are talking about the situation with anti-COVID measures conducted by the government, it is very hard to find some compliments, some good moments. Why? Because we are on the list of on the world level, the second country when we are talking about the number of the cases of infected people on 100,000. When we are talking about the mortality, we are on the 7th place on the world scale. So actually, it's very bad situation. In some, for example, our Ministry of the Foreign Affairs asked NATO and the EU for the help, because we are lacking the number of the health workers, but not only health workers, but also some medicaments. It is not possible to buy in the drugstores. So actually, the situation is very difficult. Even the government is making some very promising expectation about how easily we will solve the problems. But when we are talking about that, it is very strange, for example, that government rejected the donation of the vaccines at the beginning. These were the possible first vaccines managed by the president, because it was managed by the president. And they said, no, we are not going to take them. So this is very irresponsible policies. Those vaccines never came to Montenegro because government was not interested in trying to find some explanation that it should be done officially by state to state, etc. When we are talking about the law on the religious rights, it was adopted almost something 1 year and a few months before, and now amended by the current ruling majority 2 months ago, something like that, So the problem with the laws that abolish those provisions saying about the property rights, so the main problem in the law was that Montenegro was the country where there was not, let's say, the border between the state and the church-owned properties. Because, for example, in our history until 1860, the head of the state was the bishop. So it was something like the bishop prince who was also a head of the state. So following a constitution of the Kingdom of Montenegro, the church in Montenegrin Orthodox Church didn't have property. All property was owned by the state. So it was state property. So the law introduced by the DPS majority said that actually all those property that the church was controlled by 1918, so that was when we lost the independency, should be owned by the state if the church doesn't have proofs that it is there. So also the issue of the Montenegrin Orthodox Church was autocephaly was integrated into Serbian Orthodox Church 1921. And that's the problem, because the Serbian Orthodox Church formally didn't exist until 1921. Before, there were 4 autocephaly churches in the area of the ex-Yugoslavia, the church in the Kingdom of the Serbia, Montenegrin Orthodox Church, and 2 Karlovac Metropolis, etc. in the Austro-Hungary. So that United Church took the control over the property, but actually even during the communist time, those properties were owned by the state. So actually during this period, post-communist time, there are a lot of the changes in the property ownership, which were not followed by the documents. So they are not legal proofs that the change was registered based on the document, but was mostly done by the, by the discrete decision of some officials in Montenegrin institution. So now the problem with this law is, aside the property issue, is also that it doesn't really, and the current government is not recognizing Montenegrin Orthodox Church. During the debate and amendments, they said, no, we are not going to talk with all religious groups. We are going to have consultation only with, they said, traditional. That means Serbian Orthodox Church, Catholic Church, and the Islam community in Montenegro. All others were not welcome.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just would like to kind of also open the floor for other questions, if you just make your final point on this question.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Because we have a few more questions coming in written form, but also we have hands up. So we have Ambassador Miodrag Vlahovic, who would like to ask a question.
Yes, please. Regards to all from Rome. I'm still in Rome. I was until very recently Ambassador of Montenegro to the Holy See and to the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. And I thank my dear friend Zlatko Vujovic for his accurate reading of the present situation in our country. Since, with due respect to Mr. Relic, we meet again. Last time it was here in Rome when we had a small discussion whether Srebrenica is a famous crime, as Mr. Relic has put it, or an infamous genocide, as I was actually describing it, as it is the case. A very brief comment on some of the aspects of the problem which were described by Mr. Relic as clumsiness of our government. I think it's not a euphemism, it's an enhanced, exaggerated euphemism to describe the present situation and the role and the positions and the policies of new government as something which is related to clumsiness. What we are actually facing now in Montenegro, in our country, is the disruption of the normality. It's a destruction of the already existing democratic forms and legal system as such. We have the change, which of course is mostly positive in theoretical terms. Sometimes it's very positive and necessary to have the change. Montenegro needed the change, but entirely different one, something which is actually opposite to the present activity and the ideological and political and strategic orientation of the political parties who actually are represented in the government. The last point, with due respect to the idea that, of course, throughout history, not only in Europe, maybe in Latin America as a continent, as a history, is a better example for a positive or possibility of more positive role of church or religious organizations in certain countries. I mean, the comparison with Karel Wojtyła and His Holiness Pope John Paul II, and the activity of the Polish Catholic Church in the times of the fall of communism in Poland, and having any kind of comparison to the activities throughout these decades, especially in the last 30 years of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Montenegro, is just, I'm terribly sorry to say, not a serious idea. What we have in Montenegro is actually a church which is denying the very existence of our country. The church, the religious organization which is denying the existence of Montenegrins as an entity, as an identity, as a culture, as a history. And on the top of that, which is maybe the most detrimental part of their activity, is denying the very existence, essence, necessity, and positive tradition of living together in a multi-ethnic and multicultural society, as it is the case in Montenegro. And the last very point, with due respect to the idea of regime and communism and any kind of comparison of parables or metaphors concerning that, if Mr. Djukanovic, and that is the case, was back in 1980s, 1990s, a young socialist communist leader, then a party member who is prominent, being appointed as the first, in a very young age, as the prime minister. And he has developed himself together with Montenegro in the last 3 decades, to the extent that we were the front runners in the context of European integration process as such, and a number of other things, including our very important and historically relevant membership in NATO.
Ambassador, sorry to interrupt, but
with this, comparing the role of church in Montenegro, Serbian Orthodox Church, and the necessity for change with the fall of communism and fighting the regime in Montenegro is just a false reading of our reality. So the bottom line is very simple. Montenegro needed the change, but the opposite of this one, which is now happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comment. Thanks. And we have another question by Jovan Kojic. I would really ask for a very brief question because otherwise we won't have the time to answer them.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Greetings for panelists as well as for the whole audience. I'm focused on the topic. I have expected that I will hear more about expectation on the first 100 days. But anyhow, my question is, because I assume that you have followed the work of the government in first 100 days, the question is for both. Is there anything that you would do differently if you are on their place?
Thank you so much for this very brief and concise question. Dusan, maybe you go first and then Slavko.
Yes, Jovan, I sit in a paper house. I'm a think tanker, and we are not elected and we don't fight for political power. So whatever advice we give to politicians on the ground, it's based, on analysis which might not correspond to the situation on the ground. My personal hesitation to comment on what's happening in Montenegro is mostly because I'm afraid that the controversies, the animosities, and we could hear it also in what the ambassador or the former ambassador was saying, the readiness to confront the political opponent with all means, that this might get out of control. We are not seeing in Montenegro a fight for political change only. I think that we are seeing a fight for survival of very many people in the old regime, and they will use all possibilities they have. And similarly, those who are now coming into power, they will not hesitate to play a very rough game. So if I could in any way advise anyone on the ground, I would just say, avoid language which is inciting controversies, try to deal with each other on the basis that you are political opponents but not enemies. And it would be excellent if both the EU and NATO could increase their presence on the ground by simply saying that whatever the history was and whatever the fears in regard to the future are, you have to ensure that the country can move on. This would be my only suggestion to the political actors on the ground.
Thank you so much, Dusan. And Zlatko, for you, then the final remarks and answers to the questions. And I would also like to bring into this a last question. So what do you see currently as the biggest challenge or the risk to Montenegro's EU accession process, and what is the most urgent thing that needs to be done? Thank you, Zlatko.
So I would also refer to the Johan question. Would we do anything else differently than the government is doing? So it's a very difficult question, especially because I would do so many things differently, and we definitely do not have time. But let's say I would do one thing differently than Prime Minister is doing, because this is very important. I would not say in public then the people cannot get corona if they are using the same spoon, eating from the same spoon during the religious ceremony. So actually the Prime Minister is encouraging people not to follow the anti-corona instructions that actually his government proposed, adopted, etc. And this was not criticized neither by the Ministry of Health, So the religion, especially the Serbian Orthodox Church, doesn't need to follow neither those requirements that are restrictions for prevention of corona. It's very strange to analyze this government, and very difficult. For example, our Prime Minister in the interview is saying that he witnessed that religious people can move things mentally. And he actually witnessed that, So it is very hard to understand the professor at university saying that, and because belief in the religion is so strong that people can move things, or he said, I think, hills. So when we are talking about I'm really concerned about pro-Western orientation of Montenegro. This is going definitely, if this government continues, going to change. I think that Johanna mentioned the question about is it these changes facade? I would say that actually we are not witnessing the real change. We are just witnessing the replacement of the people, because Dusan is transformed Communist Party. Hello?
Zlatko, we have a slight delay. I think you're breaking up a little. Just try again, please. Keep talking.
Okay. So Dusan is right when he says that actually DPS is transformed Communist Party, and Đukanović comes from the communist milieu, from that system before. But most of other leaders, not those young, but are coming from them. For example, Democrats are party that emerged from the Socialist People Party. Socialist People Party was part of the DPS. They left the DPS in order to support Milošević during the 1996, and they were supporting Milošević till the end, So it's not black and white. There is a lot of it, but I hope that at least we will not, that the government will not do something to change the electorate, because this would be really dangerous, and that would be definitely motivate and provoke the protest in Montenegro, and protests are not really welcome during the Corona time. It's okay that people are protesting, but this is not the right moment, and everyone should restrain so that this kind of the radical moves and decision like that one would be.
Thank you so much, Zlatko, and thank you also to you, Dusan, for your final recommendations, etc. Also, thanks to all our participants, and my apologies first for the slightly technical problems that we have, and also for not being able to address all the questions in 1 hour's time. But we would like to thank you very much for your interest in this discussion. We hope to see some of you, or many of you, also our upcoming discussions on similar topics. And yeah, thank you very much, and have a nice day. Thank you.